If it's Tuesday, 7 days to go, Vice President Harris is set to deliver her closing argument tonight in front of the White House as the former president hits the trail amid the fallout from his divisive rally in New York City. Plus, the Trump campaign fights the fascist label, while the former president leads into anti-immigrant rhetoric and criticizes Democrats of unleashing, quote, bloodshed and squalor in U.S. cities. And the young and the restless, NBC News catches up with first-time voters on the final day of early voting in Pennsylvania, where the race for the White House could come down to the wire. Hi there, welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Ryan Nobles in Washington, where Vice President Harris is set to deliver her closing argument tonight with exactly 1 week to Election Day. And as former President Trump leans into his strongest issues and his strongman rhetoric in the campaign's waning days. At this hour, the former president on the ground in battleground Pennsylvania after speaking for nearly an hour from his Mar-a-Lago home this morning, painting the state of the country as one of doom and gloom as he attacked Harris's record.
Bloodshed, squalor to our cities is common, and they've unleashed a war and chaos all over the world. No respect for our country anymore, no respect for our leadership. No person has caused so much destruction and death at home and abroad. And she's running on a campaign of demoralization and really a campaign of destruction. But really, perhaps more than anything else, it's a campaign of hate. It's a campaign of absolute hate. She's going out and only criticizing, talking about Hitler and Nazi, and because her record's horrible.
Tonight, Mr. Trump will rally in Allentown, Pennsylvania. That's an area with a sizable Latino and Puerto Rican population, just 2 days after a comedian made racist and crude jokes about Latinos and the island of Puerto Rico at Mr. Trump's rally in New York City. Now, campaign sources tell NBC News that tonight's program at Trump's event will lean heavily on Puerto Rican speakers. But Sunday's comments appear to have rankled voters beyond the Latino community, including a key group of voters that both Trump and Harris campaigns are trying to reach: people who voted for Nikki Haley in the Republican primary. Last night, as part of our NBC News Deciders Focus Group, we went back to some Nikki Haley voters who are now split on whether they're voting for Trump or Harris or neither. But some who had strong reactions to those racist comments at the Trump rally.
That is so typical of what I hear from them all the time, and why, as a Republican, I have become so upset.
I think it's disgusting. I can't say that it would change my vote.
I'm not going to vote for Harris because of it. It still makes me torn. Like if they had done a very professional event, maybe that would have moved the needle a little towards him or something like that. But it keeps me in a place where it makes it hard to fill in that oval.
Okay, take what you just heard there with this. Nikki Haley won just over 16% of the vote in Pennsylvania's Republican primary this year, long after she ended her campaign. She also got double digits in Wisconsin, Georgia, Michigan, Arizona, and North Carolina. Folks, it is precisely those kind of voters that could swing a close election. It's also the kind of voters that the Harris campaign is hoping to win over with a Trump-focused closing message from the ellipse near the White House just a few hours from now. The vice president previewing that message during an interview with The Breakfast Club that aired today.
I'm about to give a speech Tuesday night at the ellipse in front of the White House. And part of what I will be talking about is that there is going to be a new president on January 20th of next year. And it's either going to be Donald Trump or it's going to be me. And I would ask people to imagine the Oval Office. People have seen it on TV. You know what it looks like. It's either going to be Donald Trump sitting behind that desk, writing out his enemies list of who he's going to seek revenge and retribution on, or it's going to be me working on behalf of the American people, as I always have done, working on my to-do list.
Joining me now to talk about all of this, our team of NBC News reporters on the ground. Senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez. He's covering the Harris campaign ahead of the vice president's speech tonight. Garrett Hake is in Allentown, Pennsylvania, following the Trump campaign. Also in Allentown is George Solis, who's been talking to voters ahead of tonight's rally. So, Gabe, let's start with you. The vice president set to make her closing argument about Donald Trump tonight. Now, is the campaign confident that this is the right message with just a week to go? Does what we heard from the former president today really fit into that narrative that they're trying to sell?
Well, hi there, Ryan. They definitely think it is the right message at this time, partly for the reason that you just laid out. They want to reach those persuadable voters, and they feel that this message will be key to doing so. Now, Ryan, it's not just the message that is important here, but it's also where she is giving this speech, the location. I'm here on the ellipse. You can see right behind me is the White House, and that's one of the two reasons the campaign officials laid out to us today for the selection of this place. One, that it shows the gravity of this job, the backdrop of the White House here, such a key location for where to deliver this message. The second reason is also that former President Trump, this is the place where he delivered his remarks on January 6th, just before some of his supporters attacked the U.S. Capitol. Now, we've just received some excerpts from Vice President Harris's speech tonight. She will mention that former President Trump wants unchecked power, again, alluding to his message on January 6th. And something else is this outreach to moderate voters, perhaps some of those Nikki Haley voters that you just referenced in the introduction. She says, and quote, "To people who disagree with me, unlike Donald Trump, I don't believe people who disagree with me are the enemy. He wants to put them in jail. I'll give them a seat at my table." So again, Ryan, this is a twofold argument showing just how dangerous the campaign believes that Donald Trump would be in a second term, but also this message to persuadable voters in those key swing states of the contrast between what they see as her administration and what would be a second Trump administration, Ryan.
Yeah, Gabe, it does seem to be a bit of a change in tone, right? They definitely don't want to lose this message of the threat they think that Donald Trump presents, but they're trying to find a way to tie it into what she would do as president, the enemies list coupled with the to-do list, if you will. Is this a desire to create a contrast on character, but also making sure that the policy message doesn't get lost, especially considering how short this campaign has been for the vice president?
Yeah, certainly. And look, Ryan, as you said, this has been a change in tone, especially in the last couple of weeks. You'll remember at the start of her campaign, when she took over the Democratic ticket, the initial feeling from the Harris campaign seemed to be diminishing Donald Trump, talking about how he was weird and basically saying that he was unfit for office, but he wasn't a serious person. Notice in the last few weeks, Ryan, it has changed into saying he is a serious threat to democracy, which again goes back to the message that President Biden had during his campaign early on this year. But they've made a calculation that at these closing moments of this campaign, this final week, they feel that that message will resonate with some of those key voters, a sliver of the electorate that will be so key in those crucial battleground states, Ryan.
And Gabe, it seems like it wasn't that long ago that there was this fear that she wasn't giving enough interviews. Now it seems like she's giving interviews all the time. She's going to do a round of interviews with TV interviews in key battleground states. What do we know more about those interviews?
Yeah, Ryan, it is quite remarkable. As you said, she wasn't giving many interviews, at least the mainstream outlets, for quite a while. Now it seems that every day she gives what we reporters know as a gaggle, basically taking informal questions outside of Air Force Two. Yes, you mentioned this most recent round of television interviews. She is speaking with 4 television stations in 3 battleground states. And those local TV interviews, Ryan, as you know, are a key way to get her message out. And they usually have a time limit attached to them, so she won't face some of the questions she may not want to answer on a national scale. But she is able to communicate with those crucial battleground states and those key voters that she needs with just a few days left, Ryan.
Okay, Gabe, thank you for that. We appreciate it. Let's turn now to Garrett, who is in Allentown, one of those battlegrounds, ahead of Trump's rally there tonight. But before we get to what he's going to do there tonight in Allentown, let's talk a little bit about what he did this morning, I guess this afternoon, at Mar-a-Lago, Garrett. And explain to me the utility from the Trump campaign's perspective of performing what essentially seemed like a truncated rally without the excitement surrounding it. What was the purpose of ostensibly what was billed as a press conference?
Yeah, Ryan, I watched almost all of it remotely, and it felt like a Trump rally on decaf, just very low energy, a little bit unfocused, no prompter, a message meant to be focused on immigration and migrant crime, Donald Trump's two kind of pet issues. But I don't know that it did a lot for them. The theory behind it was the idea of getting out early, making sure that he could kind of set the tone for news coverage for the day ahead of the vice president's remarks later this evening. Adding something at Mar-a-Lago, they know they can get news coverage, they know they can get national crews down there. But I don't know that whatever this was supposed to be for the Trump campaign, it was very effective in doing that. What I think most people took away from it, what I took away from it, was his complaints about what he started to seed the ground of, bad things happening in Pennsylvania, suggesting there might be cheating going on in the election up here. To me, that was probably the single biggest takeaway from that whole event. I don't know that anything moved the needle with voters who might still be making decisions out there.
And it's interesting because we just talked with Gabe about how all of a sudden the vice president seems to be taking questions all the time, entertaining interviews on almost a daily basis. Conversely, it seems as though the Trump campaign has bottled him up. Again, this was ostensibly a press conference, but he didn't take any questions, right?
Well, yes and no, Ryan. The Trump campaign never called it a press conference. I have been on a one-man mission to make sure we didn't call it a press conference at this network. Remarks to press means one thing. Press conference means you take questions. And they never said he was going to take questions, and in fact, he didn't. And it's also kind of campaign 101 that when you think you are ahead, you minimize the risk to yourself and you minimize the risk of being knocked off message, and you don't take questions. I saw it with Romney in 2012 when he thought he was ahead in the last couple weeks of the campaign. He bottled him up. You take questions when you want to make sure that your message is getting out there, or when you feel like you need to change the subject from what it is, kind of prevailing national discourse or state-level discourse wherever you are. The Trump campaign, whether they truly believe it or whether they want Donald Trump specifically to believe it, are acting like they think they're ahead, and they're trying to reduce the risk of an off-message moment, which with a candidate like Donald Trump is always a relatively high risk. And also, he's going to make his own decisions about when he wants to take questions, which I think is part of the reason, for example, on Friday when we were in Austin, they kept us like 30 feet away from him at the closest we were ever able to get.
Right. And of course, it prevented him from being asked questions about what happened at Madison Square Garden over the weekend and those controversial comments by the comedian that opened for him. Let's now, though, pivot and talk about this Nikki Haley voter a potential problem that the Trump campaign could have. She has not appeared with him. She gave him what I think is fairly described as a tepid endorsement. And she really won a pretty significant portion of the vote, even after she was out of the race in some of these key battlegrounds, including where you are in Pennsylvania. Is there any opportunity for them to kind of mend this fence and bring it home in the last couple of days, or has this ship sailed?
Well, not to be too glib, Ryan, but for the Trump campaign, it's kind of like, why start now, right? I mean, they really never made any significant effort after Nikki Haley got out of the race to court her specifically or her voters in these battleground states. Viewers of this program have probably heard me say this 15 times, that their strategy has been to almost scare those voters back into their camp, to essentially say, you're not going to be for Joe Biden, you're not going to be for Kamala Harris. They are anathema to your values. You're going to come back to us eventually, and hope that it's true. Now, in the last couple of weeks, we do know that there were discussions between the two camps to try to have some kind of unity event between the two, but steering the battleship that is the Trump campaign, I think, has made that too complicated, and time is now, frankly, just too short, Ryan.
Yeah, and I guess we'll find out who calculated that right on Election Day or the day after, or maybe after we're done counting the votes in a couple of days. But Garrett Haake, thank you for that report from Allentown. Let's go to George Solis. He's also in Allentown. He's talking to voters ahead of tonight's Trump's rally, where there have been some reaction to what happened with this comedian at Sunday's rally. George, what are the voters there telling you?
Hey, Ryan. Yeah, the consensus overall is that this joke was not funny, no matter which aisle, part of the aisle you stand on. Now, some of the voters here, some of them that still support former President Trump, saying they understand that this was the comedian's remarks and not the former president's. Therefore, it really doesn't move the needle for them at all. In fact, one voter I spoke with was actually selling merch saying Puerto Ricans for Trump, Dominicans for Trump, saying, look, we are still going to stand by him, and we understand that these jokes were in poor taste. It does not represent the people of Puerto Rico. It does not represent the island. But for us, that is our candidate. That is who we are going to support. On the other side, you have people who are completely outraged by those comments, saying for those undecided voters here in the crucial battleground state of Pennsylvania, this could be the nail in the coffin for the former president. Keep in mind, there are about 600,000 eligible Latino voters here in the Keystone State, some of them undecided still. So now the effort from those people is trying to make sure that they can court those votes using that remark as an example. And as I'm standing here, Ryan, we can actually see off in the distance what appears to be a lot of Puerto Rican voters here, those supporting Vice President Kamala Harris, who plan to, in a way, demonstrate here their opposition to the former president. But again, take a listen to some of the voices from some of the voters we've been talking to here today.
It was just not the right time for it.
Does it change your support for the president?
No, it doesn't matter, because Trump had nothing to do with that.
Wrong timing. With little days left to election and Trump trying to do his best for the Latino community, I think it was a total downfall for him to do that. I ain't changing my vote. I know I'm sticking with Trump. Trump is the one that's going to make everything better for the Latino community.
Yeah, again, a lot of back and forth on this subject. We're waiting to see if there are protests here tonight. And the big question is whether or not the former president addresses those remarks here at the rally, and if there is any kind of apology. A lot of people holding their breath to see what happens here tonight. Ryan?
Certainly not a style, George. We'll have to wait and see what happens. Thank you for that report. Coming up, a top official inside the Harris campaign joins us ahead of her major speech at the Ellipse as the campaign fights to regain some lost momentum in the polls. Plus, we're live in Ohio, spotlighting a Senate race that could tip the balance of power as incumbent Democrat Sherrod Brown fights for his political life. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. As we mentioned, we are just a few hours out from what Vice President Harris's campaign is touting as her closing argument speech here in Washington. The VP will be speaking from the Ellipse near the White House and the National Mall, the site of former President Donald Trump's remarks on January 6th, as she tells the country it's time to turn the page on Trump. A National Park spokesman says that the Harris campaign had amended their permit application tonight to accommodate more than 40,000 people. Joining me now is Michael Tyler. He's the communications director for the Harris campaign. Michael, thank you for being here. We are, of course, 1 week out. Kamala Harris giving what your campaign is billing as its closing message this evening on the Ellipse. What are we going to hear tonight, and who is this message targeted toward?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. We're very excited about tonight's closing argument. Listen, I think what you'll hear the vice president lay out is the fundamental choice in this election in prime time to the American people, particularly those voters who are still undecided, who are still deciding who they're going to support in this presidential election or whether or not they're going to vote at all. She's going to make clear that on January 20th, one person is going to occupy that building right behind me. Either Donald Trump is going to walk into that Oval Office every single day with his enemies list in hand, or Kamala Harris is going to walk in there with her to-do list of things that she wants to get done for the American people to lower costs like groceries, healthcare, housing, to make sure that we restore women's reproductive rights, to make sure that we actually bring people together in search of common solutions, right? That is a differentiator between her and Donald Trump, who, as you've seen, whether it's at Madison Square Garden or at the MAGA rallies throughout his campaign, his only currency is chaos, is division, is fear, and hatred in the absence of any actual solutions for the American people. So that's the contrast and the choice that she's going to present tonight, and then we're going to carry with us across the battleground states for the final week of this campaign.
And I hear you, and I see that the goal here tonight is about turning the page moving forward. If it's about the future, why hold it at a place that most of us remember as the speech that Donald Trump gave on January 6th?
Yeah, well, listen, we all remember what happened on January 6th when Donald Trump inspired a violent mob to try to overturn the results of a free and fair election. I think everybody remembers the harm that was caused that day. Of course, we will be thinking about that, but we're also going to talk about the harm that Donald Trump caused every single day when he sat behind the Resolute desk. And what the vice president is going to tell to the American people is that it doesn't have to be this way, right? We do not have to have leadership that traffics in chaos, that traffics in division, that celebrates violence every single day. We can actually have leadership that is focused on the people, that is focused on turning down the temperature, bringing people together and getting things done. That's what so many, particularly these undecided voters who are exhausted with the current brand of politics in the Trump era, they are looking for a new way forward. And that's exactly what the vice president has been talking about every day on the stump. And that's exactly what she's going to offer tonight.
And I understand the campaign has spent a lot of time trying to remind voters of the threat they believe Donald Trump poses. But I want to put up for you a piece of a recent story in the New York Times that maybe raises some questions about that strategy. In an email circulated to Democrats about what messages have been most effective in its internal testing, Future Forward, the leading pro-Harris super PAC, said that focusing on Mr. Trump's character and the fascist label were less persuasive than other messages. Is that true? Are those strategies less effective? And should she be talking more about her policy proposals and what she'll do in office as opposed to continuing to just talk about Donald Trump?
Well, I think she has been talking about her policy proposals and what she wants to do in office. She's been doing that since she launched this campaign. We've put out a range of proposals to lower costs for the American people, to spur small business growth, to make sure that American manufacturing remains right here in America. What I have not seen is Donald Trump do anything to that effect. His only economic policy that he's talked about since he's launched his campaign is another tax cut for the ultra rich. The only thing he's talking about for the middle class is across-the-board tax increase via across-the-board tariffs, raising costs on American families by $4,000 a month. So you'll hear the vice president talk more about her economic plans tonight, where she wants to take this country. We do think it stands in stark contrast to what Donald Trump is offering up to middle-class families across this country. We think it's resonating with undecided voters who are still making up their minds over the course of this last week. And we're going to make sure that they hear that.
I want to change gears a little bit and play for you an exchange that Bernie Sanders had with Kristen Welker on Sunday about voters skeptical of Vice President Harris over the war in Gaza. Take a listen.
My own view has been that the United States should not continue to provide financial aid or offensive weapons to Netanyahu's right-wing extremist government. But what I would say to Layla and to all those people who are thinking of not voting or maybe even voting for Trump, Trump is even worse on this issue. While I disagree with Biden and Harris, they are still better, a lot better than what Trump and Vance are talking about.
There are a lot of young voters in particular, Michael, who their number one issue is the situation in the Middle East and the conflict in particular. And they are not in line with the Biden-Harris position as it relates to the conflict and in particular what's happening in Gaza. Is it enough for those voters in particular to say that Trump is worse? Or does the campaign need to do more to explain to them why she should earn their vote?
Well, yeah, listen, I think what these voters want and what they're going to respond to is a candidate for office who actually approaches the situation with the seriousness that it deserves, who would sit inside the situation room every single day with the temperament and the judgment and the wisdom to actually manage complex global situations like the one that is playing out in the Mideast, who actually has America's national security interests at heart, who cares about our allies in the region, who cares about global security. I think what they do not want is an agent of chaos who's increasingly unhinged, who's increasingly unstable, whose only North Star is his own personal self-interest. That is a contrast that we're going to present to voters across the country as it relates to national security. And we think that voters will that will resonate with voters when they go to the ballot box.
Michael, I want to play for you something that we heard this afternoon from the Republican vice presidential nominee, J.D. Vance. Take a listen to this.
And I want us to actually follow President Trump's lead here because, yeah, President Trump can dish it out as well as anybody. He's the best counterpuncher in American politics. But when President Trump goes after his political opponents, he goes after Kamala Harris and he goes after Tim Walz. He criticizes the people who stepped into the arena, which, again, is his right to do. Every person who steps into the arena asks for it. But you know what Donald Trump doesn't do? Donald Trump doesn't attack everybody who's going to vote for the other side as a fascist or a Nazi. He doesn't demean his fellow citizens, even the ones who aren't going to vote for him. And so I'd ask us to follow that lead.
Is that true? Do you feel like Kamala Harris has been attacking Trump voters or people that would support Donald Trump?
No, I think you also know that that's clearly a lie. right? Donald Trump calls half of the country, everybody who disagrees with him, enemies of the people. Frankly, what the vice president has been referring to are the comments of people like John Kelly, his longest-serving chief of staff. She's been referring to the comments made by Esper, Milley, the people who served under Donald Trump, who know him best, who understand the threat that he poses to the American people. Those are their words, and it's why, frankly, so many people across the political spectrum, Democrats, Independents, and Republicans, are standing against Donald Trump and standing with Vice President Harris, because they understand the threat that Donald Trump poses, and they understand that in Vice President Harris, there's somebody who's fit, capable of serving as commander-in-chief, and who would be focused on the people every single day as president of the United States. There's one candidate in this race for whom that's reality, and that's Vice President Harris.
All right, Michael Tyler, thank you. I know you had to fight through some background noise there to get through this interview. You did a yeoman's effort to make that happen. We appreciate it. And good luck the rest of the way on this campaign. Up next, election security concerns in a key House race as authorities search for a suspect tied to a pair of ballot box fires, including one that damaged hundreds of ballots in a swing district. The incumbent House member in that district joins me next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Now, turning to the latest in the investigation tied to a pair of ballot box fires out west. Officials say that an incendiary device was found in a ballot box in Portland, Oregon, and a ballot box fire in neighboring Vancouver, Washington, that damaged hundreds of ballots, and they are likely connected. An identical Volvo was spotted at both scenes, and the use of that incendiary device in Portland was described as similar in nature to what happened in Vancouver. Democratic Congresswoman Gluesenkamp Perez, who represents the Vancouver, Washington area, is calling for round-the-clock law enforcement presence at all ballot drop boxes locations in that county. Gluesenkamp Perez flipped her seat from red to blue in 2022 and is now one of 5 House Democrats seeking re-election in a district that Trump won in 2020. She's in a tough race against Trump-backed Republican Joe Kent in a seat that could be key to which party controls Congress next year. And the Congresswoman joins us now to talk more about everything that is happening in her district. Congresswoman, thank you so much for being here. First off, have you received a response from authorities about your request for round-the-clock presences at these ballot drop boxes? Is that going to happen?
It seems like we're going to have election observers in a vehicle near each ballot box starting on Wednesday. So that's a huge step towards having the kind of certainty people need to ensure that their right to vote, regardless of their party, is not impeded by some dweezil in a Volvo. And so describe for me who these monitors would be. It wouldn't be law enforcement. Would they be volunteers? Would they be from the respective parties? Who are they? No, these are paid nonpartisan staff for the elections office. This is elections officials. Okay. And how many ballot boxes are we talking about here? Is this how big of an effort would this be to monitor all of these locations? 22. So it's not insignificant. And, that says nothing of trying to reach out to people. There's not a list of who was impacted by this. We have all vote by mail, which is, the gold standard in election security. But the reports by the auditor's office on the daily ballot receipts indicate that it could have been at least 1,000 votes that were impacted. And so to that point, if either you or your challenger, Joe Kent, wins by just a few hundred votes and perhaps 1,000 ballots were impacted by this, do you worry that the fire could undermine the legitimacy of the results? Well, I'm mostly upset about this as an American who's concerned that our system of voting, of each person having the right to engage in our political process, is being impeded by these weirdos. We don't know who did it, but we do know that patriotic, community-minded Americans don't take a match to other people's ballots. And so what is your message now to your constituents who have been using ballot drop boxes for a long time? You mentioned that this is something that your state has done for a long time, quite successfully, I might add. You do feel confident there will be surveillance at these locations. Does that make you confident enough to tell your supporters and other constituents that they can feel comfortable putting their ballots in these drop boxes? Absolutely. This is a secure process. There will be observers there to make sure there's quick response if another attack does occur. And if you voted in Vancouver at the Fisher's Landing ballot box between, 11 a.m. Saturday or 4 a.m. Monday, you need to check the auditor's website to see if your ballot was received. If it wasn't, call, find out, and you can go ahead and ask for a replacement ballot.
Yeah, and talk to me a little bit more about that process. If you were someone that was impacted by this, it's not as if your ballot is gone forever, right? You have an option here to make sure that your vote is cast, correct?
That's right. You can ask for a replacement ballot, and you don't need to be concerned about any kind of fraud happening here. They match your signature, and once your signature has been accepted, that first signature that's accepted is the one that is counted. It's also important that this is one of my biggest counties. And so if you turn your ballot into another location, go ahead and check online, but try to leave the phone lines open to the people who were impacted in this area. There are, at a minimum of, 16,000 people who know this is their local ballot box. Let's make sure those phone lines stay open to those folks who were impacted. So check online before calling into the auditor's office in any case.
All right, let's talk about the campaign now. And you tonight will see Kamala Harris, who's the nominee of your party, make her closing argument today at the Ellipse, not far from where I am right now. You're someone who very proudly sits in the middle of the political spectrum. What are you hoping to hear from the vice president tonight in this closing argument? Do you hope that she reaches out to a broader set of Americans, not just Democrats?
Well, that's what we want for everyone, right? We want to hear that our priorities, our values in Southwest Washington are reflected in the national agenda. We want to hear that reflected in DC, and not DC insert itself into our lives here in an incredibly toxic way that we've seen here recently. It's really important that we're talking to people about the issues they're facing. We are hearing them when they say that the prices are out of control. They're worried that they're never going to be able to own a home, that they're working 3 jobs and they're not making rent. Those are the things that I hear all the time. I was just talking to one of the directors of one of our largest labor and delivery wards. She told me that right now, about 40% of the babies born in her hospital have at least one parent addicted to fentanyl. That is astonishing. And it feels like if this is something that was happening to wealthier families, there would have been action. We want to hear it taken seriously. And it's work that I've put my shoulder behind in these past 20 months as a member of Congress.
And if Kamala Harris wins, if Donald Trump wins, I mean, there's still the very real possibility that we're facing divided government in some respect, depending on who wins the House and Senate. If you win, once again, you will be looked upon to be kind of a bipartisan voice when it comes to these conversations. How can that look? If we have a Republican in the White House, Democrats in the House, Republicans in the Senate, how will you get anything done, especially when the track record of Congress has not been that great over the past couple of election cycles?
Yeah, I mean, the work in front of me is consistent no matter who is in the Oval Office. It is to ensure that the priorities of my community are heard, that we are given the platform we need to address the hollowing out of the middle class here. I will always have my community at the center of every vote I take. And, my experience running an auto repair shop as somebody that lives in a rural community on a gravel road, mother of a 3-year-old, my experience is what informs my worldview and my bipartisan voting record.
And finally, in terms of the presidential race, I know you haven't wanted to talk very much about who you're supporting for president. Has that changed? And why do you think it's not something that you should have front and center?
Well, I don't think people in my community are going to change their vote based on what I say about the presidential level. So I'm very clear personally about my values and who I'm not voting for. But, we're running in a race that is feeling increasingly polarized and overshadowed by a national agenda that's not talking about the experiences of living in rural America right now. So, at a time when my opponent has called for the defunding of the ATF and the FBI. He has called voting by mail sketchy. And it's really even more important that we are talking about the issues that matter to people, that we are supporting the systems that undergird our values. I think that 90% of Americans agree about 90% of the issues. And so to see ourselves sort of torn apart and weaponized against each other is really concerning.
Okay, Congresswoman Marie Gluesenkamp Perez, thanks for coming. We should also point out that we would also invite your opponent, Joe Kent, to come on as well if he would like as we get closer and closer to Election Day. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Ryan.
Still to come, we'll get the view from young voters in battleground Pennsylvania on the final day of early voting there. Here's what some Philadelphia high school seniors told NBC News on their way to cast their ballots.
Probably the most important election we've had, and it is our duty to vote. It's the future. We're thinking about the future right now, and we want to make this country better, so vote.
Welcome back. Ohio may no longer be a presidential battleground, but it is at the heart of the fight for control of the Senate. Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown is facing Republican challenger Bernie Moreno. Brown won re-election in the state in 2018, which was sandwiched around Trump winning the state in 2016 and 2020. That means that Senator Brown is likely going to need more than a few ticket splitters to hold on to his seat. For more, Ali Vitale joins me now from Strongsville, Ohio. So tell me, Ali, you and I have been going all across the country looking for these ticket splitters. Who are the ticket splitters in Ohio that Brown is counting on to win?
Yeah, you were looking for them in Montana, and I'm looking for them in Ohio. And that's because you and I were both trying to answer the same question, which is, can these known political quantities, Jon Tester in Montana and Sherrod Brown here in Ohio, can their personal politics trump, for lack of a better word, the partisanship that is so baked in these red states? In Montana, more than Ohio, Jon Tester has work to do overperforming the top of the ticket. But here in Ohio, Sherrod Brown has done this before. In 2012, he outperformed Obama, even when Obama won the state by 3 points. Then after 2016, when Clinton lost by 8 here, Sherrod Brown still managed to win re-election 2 years later by 6 points, and he will have to do that again if he's able to keep this seat blue for Senate Democrats, who badly need him to successfully play defense here. To do that, he needs voters that are going to vote for Trump at the top of the ticket and then still vote for him at the Senate level. When I was talking to one of the county officials here, though, he runs the Board of Elections in Marion County, in Lorain County, and he was telling me ticket splitters get rarer and rarer by the day. Listen to our conversation. So we were talking about the idea of split ticket voters. Mm-hmm. Do they exist?
Well, there's fewer and fewer of them.
Yeah.
In our county, we used to have a large number. You would see different candidates for different parties win. But over time, there's fewer and fewer of those.
Those are the people that I have mostly been meeting, with the exception of one woman who didn't want to talk to us on camera, but said she voted for Trump and voted for Sherrod Brown. That's kind of how he's survived in at least the Trump era, right?
Well, I think if there is a race where you might see split ticket voting, it's going to probably be between president and U.S. Senate.
Yeah.
But once again, like I said, there's just fewer and fewer of those voters that are splitting tickets, at least here in Lorain County, that we've seen.
So you heard there, we did talk to one woman. She didn't want to be on camera, but she did say she voted for Trump at the top of the ticket, Sherrod Brown next. But most of the voters that I talked to today, Ryan, did say they were keeping their tickets all straight blue or all straight red, depending on who they voted for at the top of the ballot. That's why we talk so often about the role that presidential races play in these down ballot races. But there's one other interesting data point here in Ohio. Last year, this is a state that voted to enshrine abortion protections. Despite the fact that it is now considered solidly red at the presidential level, it is still a state that was moved by that issue. And that's also something that Brown is relying on here if he's able to keep his seat.
Okay, Ali Vitale, thank you for that update. Keep searching for those ticket splitters. We're going to move now to another battleground state, and that is Pennsylvania, where in the city of brotherly love, hundreds of high school seniors gathered at City Hall before marching together to cast their ballots for the first time. Joining me now is NBC News and Stay Tuned reporter Maya England, who is at that rally in Philadelphia, and she's been covering the youth vote in this election. Maya, talk to me about this. As these first-time voters are gathering where you are, what are you seeing and what are you hearing from some of them?
Hey, Ryan. Yeah, just a short while ago, there were hundreds of high school students out here in the iconic Love Park. They actually marched their way across the street 500 students estimated to be out here from 17 schools, and they landed here at the iconic City Hall. This is the last day for early voting, and a lot of them told me that they feel a sense of pride being able to cast their first ballot. Some of them feel a bit nervous. Some of them were super excited. Here's a few of the conversations we had today.
It's a lot. It's very pressure, like a lot of pressure to vote. And I know that not only does my vote matter, but a lot of youth votes in general matter. Because like I said, one vote can completely make a huge difference.
I definitely think that we have to make sure that we set the tone for the generation that's coming after us, because they are very much not sure of what the future is going to be like. So we have to stay optimistic for things to happen at the end of the day.
I think there are a lot of people my age who care about politics, and especially as we get older and our votes start to matter, we're able to vote, after 18. I think people start to pay more attention and understand that it's our civic duty to vote.
Ryan, this organization was called PA Youth Vote. It's nonpartisan, and they really just want to encourage people to start engaging in the democratic process pretty early.
And once again, Maya, there's so many eyes on Pennsylvania this election cycle. How are the voters you're talking to reacting to all the attention that they're getting? Is it easier to convince a young person to come out and vote when they know that their state could be the difference between who wins and loses?
I'll be honest, Ryan, I think some people were really excited with the amount of attention, but a few people I spoke to said the pressure was almost overwhelming, and a few of them were kind of wishing that all of it was just over and they actually knew the results. What's interesting about Pennsylvania, though, is that young voters historically kind of overperform comparatively to the national young voter numbers. So in 2020 alone, 54% of 18 to 29-year-olds showed up in this state alone. So all eyes in both campaigns are really paying close attention here.
Okay, Maya, thank you so much for that report. We appreciate it. Still to come, the fight over fascist as the Trump campaign tries to muddy the waters amid a new line of attack from the Harris campaign. Our panel is next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Over the last 24 hours, we've seen Republican vice presidential nominee J.D. Vance downplay the racist comments made at Trump's rally at Madison Square Garden. But he's also tried to muddy the waters on another line of attack from the Harris campaign. Here's Vance.
Now, I've heard about the joke. I haven't actually seen the joke that you mentioned, but I think that it's telling that Kamala Harris's closing message is essentially that all of Donald Trump's voters are Nazis, and you should get really pissed off about a comedian telling a joke. Rather than persuade their fellow Americans, they've decided that they're going to call their fellow Americans Nazis and fascists, and I think it's disgusting. Do not dare go in front of the cameras and call your fellow citizens Nazis. If you want to lead this country, act like a leader and stop insulting your fellow citizens.
Joining me now is our panel. Shelby Talcott is the reporter at Semaphore. Eugene Robinson is a columnist at The Washington Post and an NBC News political analyst. And Mark Short is the former chief of staff to Vice President Mike Pence and a Meet the Press political analyst. So, Shelby, J.D. Vance says that Harris is essentially calling Trump supporters Nazis. I haven't seen her call any Trump supporters Nazis. What do you make of this deflection strategy? Is this something that Trump supporters might believe and actually take to heart? It harkens back to when Hillary Clinton actually did call Trump supporters deplorables, and there was some resonance to that.
Yeah, I think this is pushback on the general Kamala Harris strategy of using Donald Trump's words and former officials who have warned against him to say this is what a second Donald Trump presidency would be like. And so we're seeing Donald Trump's campaign respond in this manner to that narrative, which a lot of Democrats have said this is going to be really effective for them. Now, there is some debate internally. There have been some Democrats who say, actually, this is not a good thing. But there's been polling suggesting that this is something that is effective when voters hear that this is what a second Donald Trump presidency would be like, according to people who used to work for Donald Trump.
And what we're seeing here, though, this is why Trump put J.D. Vance on the ticket, right? So that he can come out and defend him in a way that others can't.
Yeah, listen, Donald Trump certainly believes that J.D. Vance is a good messenger. We saw it at the debate. He is good at debating. He is good at getting the message out in a way that Donald Trump often is not. Donald Trump often goes off message. J.D. Vance stays on message. He's sort of a bulldog. His campaign is aware that that is what he is there for.
But it is a lie, though. I mean, we should point out that she didn't call any voters Nazis. She pointed out that certain people who work for Donald Trump have called him a fascist, and that rally the other night was, had those overtones to it. But they're trying to Hillaryize her, right? And, the deplorables was a mistake, and they're accusing Harris of having made the same mistake, only she didn't make that mistake, in fact.
So, Mark, is that a distinction without a difference, or does it matter that she's never actually said those words?
Ryan, I think so little of this matters right now. I think the reality is the American people are so polarized and divided. They've made their opinions known on this for a long time. I think that the rally was a bad idea. I think the clown car speakers was a bad idea. I don't think this is what the Trump campaign wants to be talking about in the last week. I don't think it's what Rick Scott wants to be talking about in Florida in the last week.
Or Ted Cruz.
But having said that, I don't think any of this really moves numbers one way or the other.
Well, and Eugene, maybe drill down on that a little bit, because I wonder, I agree with you. I don't think this moves the battleship, right? But aren't we past the battleship stage of this campaign? Aren't we now talking about a couple thousand voters in very specific precincts?
We are. I think we're talking about individual voters. We're talking about, David Plouffe, who's working on the campaign, on the Harris campaign, has said this is going to be so close in so many states that everybody's scratching and scrambling for those few persuadable voters.
All right, Shelby, let's talk about what Kamala Harris is going to do tonight. Big speech planned at the Ellipse. Her campaign says that it's going to be optimistic and hopeful about the future, but obviously the optics are hard to ignore. She's in the same place that Donald Trump was on the morning of January 6th, which is she's also trying to remind people of that dark moment in American history. How does she thread that needle of reminding people of that, but then also offering a bright future?
Yeah, I think it's a tough needle to thread, and the campaign is making clear that, yes, she is going to go out there and talk about the future, but she's also focused in the last few weeks about warning what she says a second Donald Trump presidency would look like. And so that I don't expect to be ignored tonight. And so it's going to be a mix of, I'm going to offer something forward-looking for the American people, but I'm also going to go after Donald Trump. That's why she's having it here in Washington, D.C. It's clear.
Is that enough, Mark? Does she have to really start to, is it too late to establish herself and only talk about her policies, or will it be enough just to hammer Donald Trump here in the last 7
I think
months?
she's missed opportunities to talk about how she would address the economy and inflation, how she would address the border. I think she has missed those opportunities, Ryan. But I do think that this is unconventional in the sense that this is not so much a get out the vote last-minute pitch. I think to your last question, what this really is targeting a small number of reluctant Republicans who are uncomfortable with Trump, who she wants to win over. And I think, as Gene said, it's really targeting at this point because there's a very narrow number of undecided voters. I think that's who they're appealing to. And I think that there's actually evidence to suggest there are more Republicans crossing over than there are Democrats crossing over their vote that has not gotten much attention.
All right, let's not. That's what we're going to talk about. Hang on, Eugene. I want to put up this data from a CNBC poll. The persuadable voters out there, they largely, look at this, appear to be independents and Republicans. 39% independents, 24% Republicans. Does this give us some insight into this closing message of the Harris campaign? The fact that she's going around the country with Liz Cheney?
I think that's the reason why the answer to every question is Donald Trump. Because I think there's a strategic decision by the Harris campaign that talking about Donald Trump reminds those persuadable voters about the chaos, about the insanity of the Trump years, in a way that makes them perhaps more likely to go ahead and vote for Kamala Harris, if they don't want to repeat that. And so I think there's going to be this turn the page motif tonight with a lot of reminding of what it was like and presenting the alternative.
And in that vein, just that I got to ask Mark about this because I want to play something that J.D. Vance said about your former boss over the weekend and then the Pence response today. So let's watch this.
So all those 10 people, including the former vice president, Mike Pence, all of these people have this horribly damaged worldview, and they're all just going after Donald Trump because they want to send people into war? That's really your argument?
Absolutely.
It's not like these are conservative.
Absolutely, that's my
argument.
These are not.
Some have recently suggested that those of us that want to see American leadership on the world stage, standing with our allies, standing up to our enemies, have a desire to send troops to war. I truly do believe that appeasement and isolation is the pathway to war. Peace comes through American strength, demonstrated on the world stage by standing with those who stand for freedom.
So how do you respond to that, Mark?
Well, Ryan, I think that J.D. Vance obviously is very bright, but he says some pretty stupid things sometimes. And the reality is that Mike Pence has a son who's a captain in the Marine Corps. He has a son-in-law who's a Navy pilot. To suggest he wants them to go off to war, he basically had the same broad swipe at John Kelly, whose son was killed in action.
Yeah.
And it's, back to your original question, it was J.D. Vance who made the Hitler comparisons in 2016 for Donald Trump.
That's right. If anybody called him Donald Trump.
Exactly.
So I think that he's obviously smart, but he does say some pretty stupid things, and sometimes he isn't on message.
Yeah, and so, Shelby, I know you were going to make a point there. I didn't mean to cut you off. This idea that there's enough Republican voters who maybe voted for Donald Trump in the past, but either January 6th or something else has made them feel like they're uncomfortable doing it. Is Kamala Harris's goal here to actually get them to cast a ballot for her, for them to stay home? How does she, what's the campaign strategy here?
I mean, in an ideal world, they would go and cast the ballot for her, but I think that they would be content if these voters stayed home and did not vote for Donald Trump. On the flip side, it's interesting because I've brought up to Donald Trump's aides that Kamala Harris is clearly trying to do this. She is clearly trying to, as you said, sort of remind voters of the chaos of the first Trump administration. And when I talk to them, they say, well, essentially, these voters have known what Donald Trump has done for years and years. And they believe that the reason that they are undecided is because they know what Donald Trump has done and don't love him, but they still don't trust Kamala Harris on some of the issues, like the economy.
Right. And so, Eugene, there is someone waiting in the wings in the Republican Party who got hundreds of thousands of votes after she was already out of the presidential contest, and that was Nikki Haley. She's offered a somewhat of a tepid endorsement of Donald Trump, but they haven't appeared together. No. Would this be a way for Donald Trump to reel in some of these voters at the 11th hour?
If he would, but he hasn't, right? She did offer. She said she would go and campaign. I guess he hasn't called. He holds grudges, and this seems to be a grudge. I think it's a huge mistake. If Nikki Haley were talking to her voters, I think she would bring some of them along, and I think a lot of them are not going to come along.
Yeah, okay. All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Great conversation. Shelby, Eugene, Mark, thank you all for being here, and we'll be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now, but the news continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.